Well, I want to begin, I think Ellie is going to come on this Sunday, what I originally said. Are you going to be here?
I don't know, we'll make a game time decision, but we'll probably be here.
Okay, well, I'll wait. Hold on. We are, this evening, I had a joke about having Lawrence come in and be a special guest presenter. He loves talking about sex and whatnot. So I said that in Proverbs class, only half jokingly, but we've covered Job and Psalms, and now we have two classes committed to Solomon's Woman, and so Sunday is our class with my pastor. Does anybody get the connection between my picture and the topic?
Yep.
Not tea, hair.
Hair.
Your hair. That's my lock of yours.
Yes.
I've been using this with Julia. Julia? No, one writer I think put it well. I think we should recognize, when we see these sorts of phrases in this book, to not only take as poetic, but really, dig for the meaning. Obviously, metaphors and how they resonate with us change over decades and centuries. And so, this might not sound real good if I said it to Julia, but, if you think, well, let me find some metaphor that might work in place. I just wanted to use that as a little intro. This evening, I want to talk a little bit about the structure of this extended poem and maybe the themes, plot, get into the first several chapters, and then Sunday finish the chapters and talk a little bit about why in the world is this in the Bible. And so, with no further ado, this begins, we often refer to this as the Song of Solomon, but at the very beginning, this is Solomon's Song of Songs. This is not just a song, a poem. It is the pinnacle of his poetic efforts, more wonderful than any other. And so there are different ways of viewing this. One is that it's essentially a collection of love poems, kind of back and forth between two people. And you might think of it sort of similar to, the works of Shakespeare in its love songs. Another view of it is that, and the one that I'm going to pursue in here, is this really more like a play set to music, poetic works. This is a dramatic opera of sorts. And so, I don't know if we have any modern or old opera present, but what are some of the most stirring operas in history? Yeah, you hit it. There you go. That's what yeah, if you have not seen this live, it is something. And I know they kind of keep bringing it back, but it's really, kind of taking this form of dramatic play that, in the 1500s, 1600s was popular, and things like Carmen and others were presented, but it updated it. I think this is an extended dramatic poem, and probably sung, and probably presented more or less as a play. Something, we've watched it through the years, Sound of Music. It's not all sung, but it's similar, or any music like that. I think the music in it is somewhat what this is about, which I think then leads into what we're going to talk about a couple of slides down. But keep that in mind. There are challenges to, I think, coming to grips with what this is really about. One is, who is speaking? Now, most of our Bibles these days have suggestions, but these are suggestions, that we don't have descended from Solomon's era, little notes that say, well, this is who is speaking here. We have to kind of infer that. Also, and I'll refer to this particularly in one section tonight, but there are nuances in translation. You can go from a language like Hebrew to English. Well, if you look at how words match, like, and, there has to be some decision made as to, well, what's the gender of the person here, and maybe that's a clue. What's implied by these words? The idea that you can translate one word for one word, if you think that way, you don't know much about translation. That's not how languages work. There's no mapping of one word to another. Sometimes multiple words fit in where one word does in another language, and that's the case here. And then I think maybe the biggest thing, other than who is speaking, but what is the mood or the perspective of the speaker? You can take it very literally, they're in this place, but in many cases, especially with the young woman, these are dream sequences, sometimes day dreams, sometimes night dreams, and there's a back and forth in sections where she seems maybe to be speaking directly to someone, and in other sections right next to it, she's thinking about someone. And I think that's one of the difficult things of the book. And so among the cast of characters, we've got the young woman that we read in the book is a Shunammite. There are essentially like the chorus, or it's kind of play a role in some ways as the narrators, these daughters of Jerusalem, and in some cases maybe friends of the young man or young woman. And then we've got you and the beloved. And by many people's way of thinking, that's the same person as the king Solomon. But by another way of thinking, you and my beloved or my lover is not Solomon. It's a different person. And so that leads to, in some ways, whichever way you take, some of the themes of the book are the same, as we'll talk Sunday, the beauty and power of romantic love. I'll come back to that. I won't hit on that too much here. Often it's viewed as an allegory. Among Israel, the nation of Israel, sort of the Orthodox view historically was that as an allegory for God's relationship to Israel. In Christian era, sometimes it's presented as an allegory for the relationship to Christ, the church. And I don't want to just dismiss those. I mean, obviously, you can read Ephesians 5, Christ and the head of the church, like husbands have a wife, or something about. But I would call that more parallelism here than a true allegory. I'm not sure that's directly what the book is about. Again, Sunday we'll talk about where in the group of Scripture does this fit. And when you think about where it fits, I think it makes some sense of, well, it's not unlike the books we've been studying. And they're not so much allegory. They're about observations and feelings about the world these people live in. But then the big thing is, well, what about the plot? Is this extended poems essentially between the young woman and Solomon expressing love for each other? Again, that's been the dominant view through time. Or is it Solomon's ultimately unsuccessful attempts to woo the young woman away from her true beloved, who is back home? That's why I subscribe to the second. I have for a long time. And going back, I've never put as much time into the study of this book as I have this time. And maybe this is confirmation bias. You begin seeing what you want to see. But the more I went back, the more I thought, this, I am convinced that I think this is a three-way story here. And often this has been viewed condescendingly. This view has been kind of viewed condescendingly by scholars as, this is a latter-day invention, this was not known about the Israelites. But think about this. Let's say Solomon lived 950 BC, he wrote this around then. Let's say by 850 BC, this play is not being performed anymore. There are no markers as to who's speaking. Would those people living in 850 have a whole lot of advantage over us in figuring out what's going on? If you picked up one of Shakespeare's plays, Much Ado About Nothing, or maybe even one of these musicals, Sound of Music, and you'd never seen it, you didn't know anything about it, you had to just read it, you can imagine, well, somebody who lived right after it had been written but didn't know anything about it wouldn't have a big advantage. And in recent years, this three-party view has, I think, come up some in the eyes of many because it stems largely not from, well, what did Israelites at the time of Jesus think about it, but it stems from a careful literary view of the book, really digging in to what's being said, careful attention. And that's what I want to do first here, give some careful attention to give you examples of why it is that someone like me or others might think that this is not just a two-party thing. Also, I'd encourage, even though they don't really push this heavily, the Bible Project, I think it has some nice viewpoints on this. But think about this. I don't know why that right side came up first. That should have come up second, sorry. Chapter 1. I liken you, my darling, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariot horses. Your cheeks are beautiful with earrings. Your neck is like a string of jewels. We will make you earrings of gold studded with silver. You are beautiful as Tirzah, my darling, as lovely as Jerusalem, as majestic as troops with banners. 60 queens there may be, and 80 concubines, and virgins beyond number. But my dove, my perfect one, is unique. Well, who does that sound like? What images are being used here? Wings, concubines, galore, will make for you jewelry. Who would say such things? Solomon. Now, in chapter 2, praise for the young woman. My dove in the cleft of the rocks, in the hiding places on the mountainside, show me your face. Let me hear your voice. Your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. It's a whole different set of imagery, drawn from a much more common experience. Praise from the young woman to her lover. She says here in, I don't know, maybe all this is messed up. Tell me, you whom I love, where you graze your flock, and where you rest your sheep at midday. Why should I be like a veiled woman beside the flocks of your friends? Who would she be saying that to? Solomon tending his flocks? Where she says, listen, my beloved, here he comes. Look, here he comes, leaping across the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. My beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. Come, my beloved, let us go to the countryside. Let us spend the night in the villages. Contrast that to then, well, a couple of them. One, she says in verse 8, under the apple tree I roused you. There your mother conceived you. There she who was in labor gave birth to you. I'm doubting that's Bathsheba, but chapter 3. Now again, there's some disagreement here. Some would say this whole chapter is praise for the young, or this whole section is praise for the young woman. Others would say some of this is the daughters of Jerusalem, then ends with the young woman. Who is this coming up from the wilderness? Like a column of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and incense, made from all the spices of the merchant. Look, it is Solomon's carrots, escorted by 60 warriors, the noblest of Israel. King Solomon made for himself the carrots. He made it of wood from Lebanon. Its post he has made of silver, its base of gold. Daughters of Jerusalem, come out and look, you daughters. Look on King Solomon wear the crown which his mother crowned. Again, contrasting what is said about the young man earlier and what's clearly been said about Solomon. Now, could it be that, there's kind of this almost, bipolar difference in her the way she's expressing the same, Solomon may be grizzly and all, but you're like a stag jumping across the mountains, and and you're living your palace, but let's go to the countryside. Maybe, but I'm not suggesting that might not be the natural reading. Just a real quick, I think before we get into the actual chapter 1, I had more on this, but I thought, I'm going to give a real quick plot summary from the first chapter and the last chapter. So, the young woman says here in chapter 1, take me with you, come, let's run. And then she notes, the king has brought me into his bedroom. So the setting here is the king's palace, but she's saying to somebody, come, let's run away. Now, I think this is one of the difficult things when I mentioned the changes in mood or perspective. These two statements come right next to each other, with nothing that says, well, this is definitely spoken to this person, and this is spoken to this person. It's easy just to run them together. But I would suggest it's a good example of where she's thinking about the young man, her beloved, and then she's like, well, but here I am. And so the idea is Solomon has chosen to be another one of his wives. She is his latest trophy. But unlike some of the kings in other countries, he's not intent on forcing this. He wants to draw her in. He wants it to ultimately be her choice to join his harem. Now, I will say in this example where the nuances of translation have been, the king has brought me into his bedroom is the way the RSV, the ESV, the NLT, NACB, King James translated this way. The NIV and the Contemporary English version say, take me away with you, let's hurry, let the king bring me into his chambers. Well, that certainly gives a different spin on it. And so exactly how you translate some of these things can make a difference in how you view them. But then, so if that were the setup, here she is at the palace, being wooed by Solomon, thinking about the young man. Now you jump to chapter 8, and this question is asked by a friend. Who is this coming from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved now? And this comment comes from the young woman, but remember, these words are really being put in her mouth by who? Solomon. Solomon wrote this. It's his wisdom literature. Love is as strong as death. Its jealousy as unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would be utterly despised. Think about who's saying that and his observation. But it goes on. Now she says, Solomon had a vineyard in Baal Hamon. He let out his vineyard to tenants. Each was to bring for its fruit 1,000 shekels of silver. But my own vineyard is mine to give. And the 1,000 shekels are for you, Solomon, and 200 for those who tend them. Again, the climactic statement here is one of wealth isn't buying love. Stature isn't buying love. Love triumphs over that. Solomon, he's got his. My vineyard is mine. Why would she be saying this if this is Solomon? If he's the only other person? Again, if that's not your view, if you think, this is just some Latter-day invention, just give it a go as we go along. Humor me, play along, and think about it. I think, again, coming back, what's the title of this book that it gives itself in verse 1? Solomon's Song of Songs. The most wonderful. I think this lends itself to this idea of this very dramatic observation of the way life is, and power and the nature of love. All right. So, with that said, jump into it here. Chapter 1. So the young woman, as we've seen, she's in Solomon's palace, and I'm suggesting thinking back about her beloved back home. So she's thinking of him. Kiss me again, for your love is sweeter than wine. How pleasing is your fragrance. Now, I would say maybe this will stick with you, resonate more if you put it to music. We talked about this, Lawrence and I, years ago in high school class. I suggested to them, if you take the tune to bad romance and maybe make Lady Gaga make it good romance, you can sort of kind of get that going in your head. So I'm not going to try.
Please.
Kiss me again, for your love is sweeter than wine. How pleasing is your fragrance. Your name is spreading like the spreading fragrance of scented oils. No wonder all the young women love you. Take me with you. Come, let's run. Then she comes to where she is. The king has brought me into his bedroom. Right? So, this is getting, as we were saying, it's getting real now.
So this would be like a daydream?
Yeah, she's imagining, reflecting, and I think the book is full of these sorts of reflections on back home. And so the young women of Jerusalem, the daughters of Jerusalem, say, how happy we are for you, O king. We praise your love more than wine. And the young woman says, well, they're right to adore you. It's not like Solomon is Solomon's got the shiny Porsche, and he's got the great palace, and he's got all the accoutrements that being king brings. All right, they're right to adore you. Now, again, these reflections of the young woman, daydreams, if you will. Tell me, my love, where are you leading your flocks today? Where will you rest your sheep at noon? For why should I wander like a prostitute among your friends and their flocks? Now the young man speaking. Now again, this would be her imagining what she's saying in this view of the book. If you don't know, O beautiful woman, follow the trail of my flock and graze your young goats by the shepherd's dens. Yeah, that's part of the reason to view this. Solomon, it doesn't really fit for Solomon to be saying, well, follow the trail of my goats and you'll find me. This seems to be her putting words and imagining the young man. But Solomon does enter here. It says, well, you are exciting, my darling, as a mare among Pharaoh's stallions. How lovely are your cheeks. Your earrings set them on fire. How lovely is your neck, enhanced by a string of jewels. We will make for you earrings of gold and beads of silver. So, Solomon, and this builds through chapters. He begins making his advances, laying on his charms and his allurements. Continues here, chapter 1. And she knows, again, I would take this as noting her setting. The king is lying on his couch. He's enchanted by the fragrance of my perfume. So we're back in real time here. And she's noting that, okay, Solomon, he's talking to me. He's being enchanted by my delights here. But then she says, my lover is like a sachet of fern lying between my breasts. He's like a bouquet of sweet henna blossoms from the vineyards of En-Gedi. You are so handsome, my love, pleasing beyond words. The soft grass is our bed. Fragrant cedar branches are the beams of our house, and pleasant smelling firs are the rafters. I should have said this up front. I'm using here in this section the New Living Translation, just because I think it fact, puts it in our idioms more than ancient idioms. Then chapter 2, the young woman continues this kind of daydreaming. Like the finest apple tree in the orchard is my lover, among other men. He escorts me to the banquet hall. It's obvious how much he loves me. Then there's this interlude where she speaks to these daughters or women of Jerusalem, and this gets repeated in the book. Again, it seems to be Solomon sort of stating wisdom, but using her as his mouthpiece. Promise me, O women of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and wild deer, not to awaken love until the time is right. And many of your versions would put that last phrase a little differently. How does it put it in some of yours? Katie?
Like the end of 7, just
Yeah.
says, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires.
Yeah. That's more the literal translation, so the NLT is kind of giving more the meaning of it than the literal translation. The idea, don't awaken love until it or he desires. That, don't try to force it, would be a way. And this keeps getting repeated. So it seems to be one of the things, one of the pearls of wisdom Solomon seems to be wanting to pass on as he works his way in writing this poem. She says, I hear my lover coming. He's leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My lover is like a swift gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he is behind the wall, looking through the window, peering into the room. Again, sometimes people read this and other sections say, well, wait a minute, does this mean, kind of illicit affairs, kind of Romeo and Juliet meet up, Again, I think that's reading it too literally. Again, as you read this as her imagination, her daydreaming, her reflections, this is her thinking about him doing these things, talking to her. My lover said to me, again, it's interesting what she has to say. Rise up, my darling, come away with me, my fair one. Look, the winter's past, the rains are overgone, the fig trees are forming on fruit, and the fragrant grapevines are blossoming. Rise up, my darling, come away with me, my fair one. It seems to be this young man from back home, her imagining, he's telling her, hey, don't stay there. Get up, come back, let's go out. Isaac?
Is it possible that maybe on top of that this is kind of showing us that she just can't get him out of her mind? Like everything's reminding her of him. If she's seeing him, he's looking in from the window. He's all, as opposed to it being kind of creepy, like he's stalking her. Maybe it's just, I can't get my mind off you. I can't stop thinking about what could have been.
No, I think that's exactly. I think that expresses it very well. That, again, imagine yourself, maybe the women here, that you've been picked by the king and brought to his palace and put in fine clothing and perfumes and set in luxurious places, and he's even spoken to you with these very kind and charming words. And yet, when you were picked and brought there, you had already given your heart to this other person back home. What would you be thinking about? Oh man, Solomon is the greatest. This is awesome. Oh, it would be, like you said, it wouldn't be this creepy, here's somebody creeping up looking in. It'd be, just imagining your beloved, your coming to you, urging you to come home, rise up, come back home.
It's almost like she's comparing Solomon to this lover. When it talks about Solomon saying, oh man, you would look so beautiful in all this jewelry, but then in her mind, she goes to, maybe this small cottage, kind of isolated. I almost wonder if there's a dichotomy there.
I think that's exactly right. That there is this, you see this back and forth between his type of endearing phrases, and the young man. He's laying it on with all the luxurious items. He's talking about, come, let's go to the vineyard. Let's go down with the blooming figs. Let's go back to the things that we've grown up that are. And so, yeah, I think there is. I think you're really getting it. I'm going to have to let Isaac come up here. He's getting in tune with this here. So, all right. My lover is mine, and I am his. He browses among the lilies. Before the dawn breezes blow with the night shadows, we return to me, my love, like a gazelle or a young stag on the rugged mountain. Then, chapter 3, it's not clear if this is a night dream and a sleep dream, or I'm inclined to think this is still a daydream, because in a chapter or two later we see what's clearly a nighttime, a sleep dream. And the phrasing is a little different. But one night I lay in my bed and I yearned for my lover. I yearned for him, but he didn't come. So I said to myself, I will get up and roam the city, searching in all the streets. I will search for the one I love. So I searched everywhere, but I didn't find him. A watchman stopped me as they made the rounds and asked, have you seen the one I love? Then scarcely had I left them when I found my love. I caught him and held him tightly. I brought him to my mother's house, into my mother's bed, where I had been conceived. Again, I think people getting overly literal toward the end here, think, oh, this is the two, this kind of hookup. I don't think that's what's happening. I think this is her imagining and dreaming. I'm not sure she ever leaves her bed here. I'm not sure she actually walks through this city, which wouldn't be real safe for a young woman in the middle of the night in Jerusalem to be walking around. She's thinking about, I'm going to go search, I'm dreaming and imagining, I'm going searching for my lover. And I can't find him anywhere, but then he finds me, and we go off together. I hope you're as into this as I am. I mean, I really, I don't know, we got a couple of here singers. If we could put this to music of the night or something, maybe it could really be touching you. But I find it really, really moving. But then she comes back to this statement. Promise me, O women of Jerusalem, by the gazelles of all deer, not to awaken love until the time is right. So again, this wisdom that Solomon seems to offer about not forcing romantic love. I can offer some comments on my youth, but you wouldn't want to hear them, and I wouldn't want them to get back to Joey. Solomon then, he makes this grand return and entrance back to the palace. Now, again, this is one of those places where, depending on your version, some would suggest this begins with the young woman and continues with her speaking. Others suggest that it begins with the young women of Jerusalem and then ends with the young woman. But it says, who is this sweeping in from the wilderness like a cloud of smoke? Who is it? Fragrant with myrrh and frankincense and every kind of spice. Look, it's Solomon's carriage, surrounded by 60 heroic men, the best of Israel's soldiers. King Solomon's carriage is built of wood imported from Lebanon, which will figure in conversation here. Its posts are silver, its canopy gold, its cushions are purple. It was decorated with love by the young women of Jerusalem. Now this is definitely the young woman. Come out to see King Solomon, young women of Jerusalem. He wears the crown his mother gave him on his wedding day, his most joyous day. So, she's not totally oblivious to what's going on around her, and, not totally unimpressed, but, this is impressive. This is the king. And he would have been held in high esteem by most people, by subjects in Jerusalem and Israel. Now, Solomon starts laying on the charm as best he can. Come with me from Lebanon, my friend. Come with me from Lebanon. Come down from Mount Ammon, from the peaks of Senir and Hermon. And so all of these are some of the major peaks in the mountains of Lebanon. Hermon is the highest. Ammon and Senir are slightly smaller. Where the lions have their dens and the leopards live among the hills. You have captured my heart, my treasure, my pride. You hold it hostage with one glance of your eyes, with a single jewel of your necklace. You are a garden fountain, a well of fresh water streaming down from Lebanon's mountains. Like Isaac said, you see this contrast in the imagery that, by my accounting, the young man is giving of the vineyards and the fields and the lilies. What imagery is Solomon drawing from? The grandest places of their region, the highest peaks, and where the cedars of Lebanon. And then he talks about in this, you are so beautiful to hold, like the necklace that likely he gave. That's how beautiful you are. So, I'm going to end there. So, part 2, you got to come back Sunday for part 2. So, what? As we go through this, one thing, whether it's the woman or the young man, or it's 2 people or 3 people, certainly there's something to be said for the love language that's being used. We'll have more to say about that Sunday and the place this has. But observations you all want to make here. We have a few minutes before class is done. Man, you all almost all the way. I've left you speechless. I usually have some.
I don't have anything.
All right.
I'm trying to sort out, especially the fitting in, God and Israel's relationship and Jesus and his church, and kind of reading through. I don't really have any explanation. I was just going to throw that out there since you just kind of working through what you went through tonight and working in some of those relationships. And, the first time it jumped out in chapter 3 when you brought it up of seeking someone else, but then, the king kind of finds me, or my lover finds me, I guess. Just like, Jesus finding us. I don't know. I'm trying to sort through that, to be honest. I'm not exactly the most poetic person, so I have a harder time.
It's one of the reasons while I'm certainly not dismissive of, like I said, like a parallelisms between what's going on here in our relationship with Christ, but I think it is really stretching Ephesians 5 to find a lot of the detail here, because Ephesians 5 isn't focusing on the romantic, and even as we get deeper, this erotic nature of this relationship. This book, I'm not going to pull all of it out, it would be a little awkward maybe, but there are very erotic sections of this book. And that's not what Paul is getting at in Ephesians 5. He's talking about more while this wouldn't dismiss the agape love, the love of the will, this is more than that. Or in addition to that, I don't want to say too much of what I might say Sunday, but it's one of the reasons occasionally through my lifetime I've heard a preacher or two, because I think our world is so overrun with sort of erotic love and romantic love to the exclusion times of the love of the will. And in trying to emphasize the importance of the charitable love, have gone to the extreme of even saying things like, well, the Bible never talks about romantic love. Well, you must have torn Song of Solomon out of your Bible, because this whole book seems devoted to that. Again, that doesn't mean there isn't some overlap between the two types of love, and certainly overlap between Christ's love for us and the kind of love expressed here. So again, to be dismissive of that totally, I think it would be overboard.
this may still be too specific, but to that point, maybe one thing that we can kind of compare between our relationship with God and relationships in this book is it seems clear, I'm with you, it seems clear that there's three parties, not counting the bystanders. And if that is the case, trying to put myself in Solomon's shoes, if I knew that the person I was in love with was in love with someone else and actively like could not get their mind off them, that would hurt me. There again, don't activate love until it, my version says, till it pleases. And so that kind of made me think that must be how God feels towards us when our mind is on something not him.
Yeah.
When I can't get my mind off of money or people or something more evil, whatever it is, if my mind does not belong to God, that's got to hurt him.
Let me turn this out a little and say that I think the analogy might be more what her love for the young man is the pure and the deeper, and Solomon's, it's more, this is a love of infatuation and desire only. I mean, how many wives does Solomon have? And that's one of the things that sort of, I think Paul calls it the two idea. Solomon had 700 wives.
Where does this one fall in?
Right. Well, I know you're 499, but oh, you are the best. I mean it this time. Well, and so I think it does fit more with the idea that, like you're saying there, hey, there are these allurements, charms. We'll pick up on something. Thank you, Mom.